Welcome to All There Is. I'm your host, Kelly Bargabas. Thanks for tuning in today. In today's episode, we have a real story from a real person living a very real life. And today's real story is from a woman named Pat Henneberry. Her and I met over 10 years ago when we worked for the same company based in Boston, Massachusetts. We've been friends ever since. Pat lives in Austin, Texas, so I don't get to see her that much at this point. We no longer work for that same company, but she's still a really good friend. She recently wrote a memoir called My Soul Showed Up, Finding Hope and Resilience Against All Odds. And I'll just read the back cover for you. Pat Henneberry is in the prime of her life when, with no warning, her back breaks. Rendered helpless, this fit, active athlete is thrust into a storm of doctors, chronic pain, and PTSD. It seems all her body wants to do is give up, but she refuses to let it win. In this uplifting, inspirational memoir, Henneberry gathers grace and gratitude as she travels the not-so-straight road to recovery. Along the way, she asks all the right questions, including, why me? Why is accepting help such a struggle? And why is it so hard to adopt a dog? My Soul Showed Up candidly reveals one woman's determination to maintain her faith and her sense of humor while building resilience against all odds. This book serves as a motivating manual for all of us about how to keep showing up even when life keeps knocking us down. Now, I know just from being friends with Pat, and I've had a front row seat to her story for these last 6 years, I've witnessed it. I've watched her go through it. The reason I want to share it with you is because, number one, I think it's part of the human experience. Pat's story is one of pain, but it's also one of hope. And her story inspires hope for those who find themselves living a different life than the one they planned. Her ability to pivot, to move away from her body as her source of strength and turn to her soul instead, shows us all what we are truly capable of and where our real power lies. And I'm confident it will resonate with you and many listeners. So thanks for listening in today as Pat and I sat down and had a conversation about her story. Welcome to All There Is, Pat. As you know, All There Is all about the human experience. And as we all know, the human experience is full of many things, some wonderful, some splendid, but also tremendous pain is part of the human experience. For a lot of people, and I would think at some point in most of our lives, we'll all experience pain to some level. But I think chronic pain, which your story delves into, is something that a lot of people deal with. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk today and share your story. Walk us through a little bit of your backstory.
Well, as you know, it is a long story, so I'll try not to, but it did happen 6 years ago, next month. 6 years, Kelly. And I know that you have been through all of these 6 years with me. Thank you very much. I walked into my house one day and I had, unbeknownst to me, an undiagnosed spinal disease called spondylolisthesis. And what that is where the lower lumbar and the spine meet, they actually shift away from each other. Now, there are many people who have spondylolisthesis. They call us spondies, so I'll just make it short, spondies. You can, as a fun drinking trick, you could try to say that 3 times really fast, but I don't recommend it. So spondies. So I walked into my house and my spine shifted away from my lumbar. Normally, a spondee shifts forward or backwards. Mine shifted to the left. So when that happened, I lost all the feeling immediately in my left leg. And it felt like lightning bolts going through my body of just excruciating pain. I was brought down to my knees, and I luckily had my phone with me and called a neighbor who came over and took me to the ER. And that was my journey. I had left my house that night and didn't see it for another 2 weeks. Started my journey of having 8 surgeries in 6 years. What happened, because it was undiagnosed and it slipped so far, everything above and everything below really crushed. I had multiple discs I had a hip that had to be replaced. I went through a multi-level spinal fusion with titanium rods and screws, and 10 months into that recovery, it all broke. But they had to use my own bone marrow to rebuild my spine. So I had to go up to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and it was a very, as they call me up there, I'm a complicated case. So hence my journey begins. All the rods and screws broke 10 months into recovery. I've basically been in recovery for 6 years. And as of today, I'm 9 weeks post-op, having some cluneal nerves. I had 8 cluneal nerves removed out of my spine. So that's a whole nother story, but that's my story in a nutshell. I was working for a company that you and I both worked for at the time. And I was working for a company and ended up losing my job after this happened. I also was a athlete. So I was on 2 competitive tennis teams. I was trail running. I loved to go to spin classes and open water swimming. So it has been a huge life transformation for me. And that's the story in a nutshell as far as
Wow.
what happened.
Wow, you did a great job summarizing the trauma that your body went through. I mean, just setting aside what it does to your psyche, your mind, your soul, just your physical body, poor body, just going through all that trauma.
Yes. And it's funny you mention that. When you're going through all of this, you focus on the pain. I kind of hindsight wished I focused more on my body as a whole and how
Hmm.
I could help it instead of just the pain and how I can get rid of it. Which is something I'm starting to work on. It's called mindfulness pain management. There's lots of studies, and that will be another podcast because
Mm.
there's lots of studies on the brain. Pain sends us signals to the brain, which tell us that there's something wrong, right? And that is a good thing. However, you can actually, just like anything, develop a pattern in the brain, especially if it's chronic. They'll talk about acute pain, which is like you go out to get the mail and sprain your ankle. That is immediate acute pain and eventually will be fixed and go away. Then there's chronic pain. And I've read different things, but usually 6 weeks or longer, they can start talking about it being chronic. And that's where your brain, after about, I think, 3-4 months, actually puts those pain patterns in the brain.
Mm.
And now you have to relearn those pain patterns. So I'm just learning about pain reprocessing basically, and we'll make that our next podcast.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. Well, we'll put a pin in that. Simple tools to manage pain. That'll be the title of an upcoming podcast. What I really want to focus on today, so you took all of this trauma, these 6 years of surgeries and being in this constant state of trauma and recovery, and turned it into a book. So you wrote a memoir called My Soul Showed Up, Finding Hope and
Hmm.
Resilience Against All Odds. It is for sale today, right? I know it's on Amazon. I know it's in
Yep.
bookstores. You can buy it online. There's Kindle and paperback. And the focus of your story is hope and showing up in the midst of all of this. And so that's what I
Hmm.
I want to spend some time talking about today. And for those people who are listening to this episode, I believe when you speak to groups and speak to audiences, you have a presentation that you do called The Power of Showing Up. And so I want to spend some time talking about that today. What is showing up? What does that mean? Why do we need it? And how do we do it? What does that look like?
When I think about the power of showing up, when people they come up to me all the time and say, I don't know how you do it. Well, quite honestly, for a very long time, I didn't know how I did it. But I remember saying to people, I just show up. I just show up. And I'll give you a short story that happened just recently. I've been trying to get a TEDx talk, and I was just 2 weeks from having my 8 colonial nerves removed from my spine, which, to say I was in pain is an understatement. I absolutely hated these surgeries. They needed to be done. But lo and behold, I get a call, an email saying, hey, we want you to do a 5-minute video. You've made it to the final round for this TEDx. And I immediately went into my head and said, hell no. There's no way I can show up for this. I feel like crap. I don't have any of my, production equipment. And then something in my head just said, Pat, just show up. As ugly and as messy as this first step is going to be, show up. And I decided, okay, I don't care how I look. I don't care. I got a roll of duct tape and taped my phone to the recovery room window. I will say I played a quick little dance song to just get out of my head and get some motivation, some inspiration. I recorded it. That brought me to being a finalist in this TEDx. I showed up. So one major thing is in showing up basically when life sucks, being present and engaged despite challenging circumstances, which involves consistency in our lives, right? Maintaining our commitments, our routines, even when we don't feel like it. And it's okay if we do the bare minimum. It's okay. I literally took an ugly first step, and it's that first step that's the hardest, right? And you have to allow yourself to be mediocre, to just keeping a little bit of momentum rather than completely stopping in your tracks. I mean, today, I'll tell you, because I'm only 9 weeks post-op, I love yoga. And I have stories about how it has saved my life. And I decided, I've just gotten home for about 3 weeks now, and I decided I'm going to go to yoga. But I literally can't do anything. I can't do a downward dog. I can't bend. Someone doing yoga who can't bend, and my instructors are always like, we're so glad that you showed up, even if it's to lay on the mat. And I tell them, I am doing yoga. I'm doing it in my head. They instruct me. I close my eyes and I see myself doing all the yoga movements. I even broke a sweat today. And I like imagining myself, but that is keeping the momentum, even though it is in slow motion.
I love that.
And that is one of the many things that I have found that creates that power of showing up, because so many things are created from it. And it's part of, self-care, showing up for yourself, maintaining those daily practices that support your well-being. And it's hard when you don't feel good, when you feel terrible. I don't care, maybe you've gone through a terrible divorce, maybe you've lost a child, maybe you've lost a parent, maybe you've had a dire prognosis. Whatever it is that's going on in your life, you feel terrible. And that voice in your head is saying, no, not today. No, I'm not going to do it. Not today. And you have to override that voice and take that one step, that first step.
I love that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about physics, when you were talking too, right? Like taking that first step, putting some action, some you use the word momentum. Like if you want to change where you are, you have to introduce some sort of movement, even if it's going to yoga and showing up on your mat. I love the image of you being on your mat and just doing a visualization, visualized yoga. And there has to be some power in that, right? Like even we talked about neural pathways briefly. That's doing something.
I truly, truly go through every moment. And that way, I also know that when I can start moving more, I'll be ready. I'm trying to keep up in my head because I haven't been to yoga for 4 months. So, you kind of lose some things. But yes, touche, Kelly, movement, any type of momentum. And even if that momentum pushes you back a little bit, the next time you will move forward a little faster. You'll be
Mm-hmm.
in a better place. And like I said, sometimes that first step is going to look ugly, and
Mm-hmm.
you just have to be prepared for that. I learned really quick that you can't show up perfectly when you're
Mm-hmm.
going through hard times.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot show up perfectly. And I'm one of those people, I need a clean desk to go to the next project. I need
Mm-hmm.
everything's lined up. Well, guess what? That's not how recovery works.
Mm-hmm. You talked about yoga. You talked about your video and your application for a TED Talk, but it doesn't have to be those things, right? Like it can be picking up the phone and calling someone when you're feeling depressed, going to work when you don't feel like you can make it. What are some other examples
I mean, if
you've
you
run
love
across?
gardening,
Mm-hmm.
you could go out and pick weeds for 10 minutes, not all day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, You can, like you said, call someone. In my book, and one part of the emotional healing is engaging with your pain, but also try not to avoid others, try not to be recluse. I have done that, and it doesn't help you. That avoidance, it may seem easier in the beginning, but it often really prolongs your pain and suffering. And that's why that mindfulness of being aware of your
Mm-hmm.
pain. In one of the chapters of my book, I also say, don't stop dreaming. I stopped dreaming. I had a dock I loved on the lake that I had to sell. I had a sailboat. I was an avid sailor. I couldn't man the boat. It was just sitting there, so I had to sell it. And I stopped dreaming. At the end of chapter 9 in my book, I remind the reader that dreaming is what will get you through the muck. No matter what season you are in, we have to keep dreaming. We have to have new dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. It's hard. And those dreams can be little micro dreams. These don't have to be huge, massive, massive dreams, but we do have to have, and I think when we can have some, micro dreams that, miracles can happen. But if we stay home, if we're recluse, so go out and, to your point, like go out and just pick weeds for 10 minutes if you love to pick weeds, or, go sit in your driveway and say hello to some neighbors. I do that, and my neighbors know I love to sit in the driveway, and they come over and pull up a chair, and it's so important, and it helps with that personal growth during hard times, and often that leads to profound self-discovery,
Mm-hmm.
a deeper appreciation of life and an increased sense of purpose. So,
Do you have any new dreams you want to share? What are
oh
you dreaming about
man,
these
why did I
days?
bring that up?
I know.
Well, I am dreaming about that TEDx. I
Mm.
would love, I'd love to get that. I also, I've been a speaker in my industry for many years, and I had a lot of different workshops and things. And I would love to be able to evolve and build that outside
Mm-hmm.
of my industry I've been in for 30 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things, yeah. And I'm hoping that when this recovery is over, I can do some traveling.
Another thing that I was thinking about as you were talking about showing up and doing the small things, taking that ugly first step, not, and you mentioned not becoming a recluse. And it made me think of, for those of you who are listening to this episode and think, oh, I don't have any pain right now. This doesn't apply to me. I'm not having chronic pain. You may have a friend who is experiencing chronic pain. And I know for me personally, as your friend, we don't talk every day for sure. We'll go sometimes weeks without talking. And I know your journey. And so there are times when I haven't heard from you and I think, I haven't heard from Pat in a while. I need to check on her and make sure she's not spiraling. I need to make sure she's not being a recluse. I need to make sure she's doing all these things. And that's a really important thing, I think, for people to remember to check in on your friends who are going through whatever the trauma is. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's chronic physical pain, maybe they're having surgeries, or maybe they're going through a divorce, or maybe they've lost a child. Whatever it is, there is a power of showing up for your friends too and just checking on them. Hey, have you been to yoga? When was the last time you were in yoga? When was the last time you went outside and went for a walk or were in your garden? Like we all know what our friends love to do, right? When was the last time you went for a swim or went out to dinner? So I think that's a really important.
Of course, I dedicated my book to my mother. The circle of life went backwards, right? She's going to be 94 this year. And I'm 63, and she started this journey with me when I was 56.
Mm,
And she has been there for every surgery. She has been there when I have been dropping the F bombs because I'm so angry at the world and life. And she's just this little Irish thing that nothing phases her. And
mhm,
she has been alongside me. But, hearing you talk, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. And, and I say it's one of my favorite quotes, and I can't tell you who said it because I think it's an unknown quote, but or author, but it's in my book, and it says each of us are angels with only one wing, and in order to fly we have to embrace each other. It's one of my most favorite things because whether you're in the hospital on the spinal floor and somehow you meet someone who's going through the same thing and you start visiting with them, or and they lift you up, offering support, being there for others through difficult times. Even if you're going through the difficult times, don't forget to offer support to others because it is so powerful when you're the one in pain and going through a terrible time to help someone else who's going through similar things.
mhm,
Um, it's a very powerful thing to do.
mhm,
Uh, and yes, it's easy to just, I often during my workshops ask people, like, what can you do today to show up for something that you weren't planning on showing up for? Can you show up for one more thing a day? I mean, think about it. That's 365 more things at the end of the year. What can you show up for? Is it to call a neighbor? Is it to visit a friend, call your grandmother an extra day this week or month? Or what does it look like for you? Or maybe it's you need to show up for a yoga class. Maybe you need
mhm,
to show up for a spin class or help someone at work. There's so many simple things we can do to show up for ourselves and others. And I think we take it for granted. I mean, I know I did. I used to, show up to the boat dock every weekend and there'd be 25 people on there with their kids. And I was hold my drink and watch me flip off the dock as I never landed the flip. But it made for great laughs
mhm,
on the dock. But those were mindless days, effortless days of showing up. It was so easy to show up. Never did I think I would be in a place in my life that would be really hard to say yes to brunch or yes to a happy hour or, yes to anything that involved me doing something extra in my day other than showing up for physical therapy, which I never wanted to do either. We all have effortless days. And if you're in your life right now and you are in effortless days of showing up, I applaud you. And I think that's great. And I hope that you are very mindful and grateful of those moments and times because unfortunately they're not to be Debbie Downer. I don't mean that they're not always going to be there, but I think just think, wow, I'm showing up for these things and they feel great and I'm blessed. And what can I do a little extra today?
You talked about showing up even though you're in pain, you're experiencing a terrible time. to show up anyway. And that's exactly what you're doing, what you are doing, Pat, with your book, right? Like you wrote this
Yep.
story, you're going around and giving workshops and sharing your story with people, and you're still going through it. You're 9 weeks out, did you say, from your last surgery? So it's
Yes.
not like you've arrived, right? Like you are still
Right.
you're still recovering, and you are still having to walk yourself through this process of showing up and remembering the power of showing up and taking that step to share your story with the world, even though you're still in the middle of it, which is very commendable. It's very powerful. And I want you to share a little bit. I know you've shared it with me personally, and it really resonated with me. The response that you receive when you do show up at a bookstore and you have a reading or you give a workshop.
First of all, I never really dreamed of writing a book, and I never thought I would write a memoir. And so I started doing some book signings, especially locally. At one of them was at a spa. I've done them at libraries. I've done them at bookstores. Just resorts. It has been super fun and great. And what happened is that I was not prepared for at all is people would show up to my book signings, and of course they'd stand in line and want my autograph. And I used to think to myself, they don't even know why would they want my autograph? They don't even know me. Like I'm not a famous author or anything. And but what it was, as much as I would love to say yes, they were standing in line for my autograph, they wanted to share with me their pain. And gosh, I would say about 100% were women, and they wanted to share with me their pain. And I started realizing that women don't like to share their pain. And when I look back at my grandmother, she never complained and she never talked about her pain, even after she broke her pelvis and her hip and who knows what was going on in her back. She never complained. My mother to this day never ever complains. And I know she has neck pain and I know she has back pain. She's had a couple bad falls, but she never complains. And I think that women, I do think women are pretty strong. And for some reason, it has been taught for us not to share our pains. So I like that I'm able to, that there's a book. My book is filled with hope nuggets, which people seem to like, but they have thanked me for writing my book because they almost feel like they are allowed now to share their pain. Yeah,
Like you're giving
it's,
permission, yeah, permission to talk about something that maybe was taboo, or they just didn't feel like they had permission to share, or anybody cared to listen,
I
right?
think that's it right there, Kelly, is that one thing I did find out, people don't like to hear about other people's pain. I
Mm,
think it gives them fear. I think
hmm.
that it scares them. So it's very hard for people to talk about pain. It kind of reminds me, because we're on this subject, a funny story. My mother, wonderful. And but when we were little kids and we were complaining about this or that, and she would just say, well, go take a bath, you'll feel better. That was the,
Yeah,
like, just take a bath, you'll feel better.
right.
And I remember once I walked in the house, I'm like, oh, my shoulder really hurts right here. And she's like, oh, just take a bath, you'll feel better. I had come in from sledding, and I had probably 10 layers of clothes on, and I went take a bath, and she checked in on me, and I was probably 10 years old, to see how I was doing. And when she walked in and I was laying there in the bathtub, my collarbone was sticking out of my
Oh my
chest.
gosh.
And she was like, okay, get dressed. We're gonna go to the doctor now. But it's funny, but in a way, I mean, it was good. She doesn't say that anymore to me anymore,
Yeah,
Kelly.
yeah, yeah. But buried in there is some truth, right? And some showing up. Like, yeah, you feel crappy, but go do blank and it will help. It might change the momentum. It might, I always liken it to kind of changing the track in your brain. And of course, I'm going to age us again because it makes me think of like when vinyl records would get stuck right, in a certain track
Yeah.
and just start to skip. And it's like sometimes you just got to move that needle. You got to
Yeah.
just kind of bump that needle over to the next track, and you need some momentum to do it.
And another funny story, not funny, but I found myself in my childhood bedroom really going through one of my worst days. I think it was surgery number 3 after everything had broke, and I had to go through everything all over again, except for this time they filled me up with cobalt instead of titanium. And I just laid there like, why? Why did this happen? And I started crying, uncontrollable, the snot rolling down your face, and you can't catch your breath, that kind of crying. And my mom went around the house kind of looking for me and found me on the bed, and she squeezed my arm, and in her cute little Irish way, she just said, everything's going to be okay. And then she said, David Muir is on ABC National News, which was a routine for us. And he's on in 10 minutes. And she walked out. And at that moment, I kind of thought, well, I need to get my act together because this is a routine we have together, something that we do together. And guess what? I stopped crying. I got up. I went into the family room and watched ABC National News with mom.
Mm,
And that is kind of to your point, like sometimes you just need that little push, the needle just needed to be kind of pushed, right? To
mm-hmm,
stop skipping. And she did. And that was what I needed, that
mm,
little push. She wasn't saying, I don't want you to cry, or, she just really pushed the needle just a
mm-hmm,
little bit to
mm-hmm.
stop it from skipping. Yeah.
I love that story. Since too, I know you love Brene
Yep.
Brown, and I love Brene. And she
Yes.
has a quote, and I'll find the exact quote before I air this episode. But the quote is something about her mom taught her that when you encounter people in pain, don't look away. Look them in the
Yeah.
eye, look them in the eye. And I think it's human nature to look away because sometimes
hmm
people's pain is too much to bear, or it's uncomfortable, or it's scary, or we don't want it to, like, we think we might catch it, right?
Right.
And so our human nature is to look away. And she has a great quote that says, when you encounter people in pain, look them in the eye
Mm.
and really see
I
their
love
pain.
that.
Yeah, I'll find the exact quote. So how has writing this story, writing this memoir, changed your life? What did you learn from it? What was the biggest thing that it has taught you?
I think that, first of all, it's not easy to show up,
Mm,
and it's easier just to sit at home and watch Netflix. Not to say that you're not allowed to have those days. You do. You are allowed. But it doesn't mean being perfect. It's about being present
mm,
and doing your best given the circumstances, and taking care of yourself while facing whatever challenges you're going through. It's give yourself permission, allow yourself to step away from the stressful situation. It's okay to take breaks and recharge. You don't have to I'm not saying you have to show up for every single thing in life, but like I said at the beginning, if you can have just that little bit of momentum, it can be 10% of what you used to do. It's okay. It's okay to lay on a yoga mat, because the hardest step for me was stepping into the room. I think also showing up for me, I learned the hard way that information gives us hope. So don't be afraid to show up and brainstorm with people different ideas, and yeah, taking small steps, prioritizing your care, and focusing on gratitude, Kelly. I mean, and you know me, I was always very grateful. I've always been a grateful person, but I never ever really understood gratitude and being compassionate for others until I have gone through what I've gone through. And learning, one of the biggest lessons I learned that the best leaders I've come across are compassionate leaders. Um,
Mhm.
I've had a lot of doctors or surgeons that could care less about compassion, and I'd walk out of their offices crying, and then others who were, super compassionate, and they give you hope. And um, yeah, so not to be afraid to seek out support, maintain those routines, even if it's watching the nightly news with your mother, you know,
Mhm.
practicing acceptance. We haven't even talked about much of that, but recognizing that some aspects of your situation are beyond your control, and the focus on what you can influence instead of trying to control all the things that you can't. I'm probably not going to be a huge tennis player anymore, but if I can go out and walk 3, 4 miles a day, I'll be thrilled. Those are things that it takes a long, long time to accept. But if you can practice that acceptance from the beginning, we are more than our
Mm.
limitations. We definitely need to hold on to possibilities. I don't want people to give up
Yeah, that's exactly
practicing
where I was going to
acceptance.
go, actually, because the
Yeah.
title of your memoir is My Soul Showed Up.
Mhm.
And I think that's what you were just getting at, right? That even when our bodies, like one of the lessons you had to learn, and again, I know this not only from your book, but also because I know you, is realizing that you had to come to terms with the fact that your body probably won't be able to do and perform at the level it used to. And that was where so much of your identity was tied up in that. You had to make space for your soul to show up and not make
Right.
it just
And
about your physical body.
exactly. And Kelly, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I still struggle with that, right? 6 years later, I'm like, why can't I do this?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, are there other things that I can learn? Yes. There's so many other things I need to learn in life. I think that being able to stay open to those things are what is going to get me through these next years in my life. Because of course I dreamed of, sailing. I dreamed of a lot. But I'll tell you, I know that eventually I'll be able to get back to those open water swims,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that. And swimming and water has been one of my big healers. Of kind of like you, Kelly, I'm a water person. Like, we are water people, and
Mm-hmm.
water is healing to me, even if I'm just floating face down in a pool. Water is a huge healer for me. But there's a lot of misconceptions about this power of showing up.
Okay, so talk about that. What is the biggest misperception about the power of showing up?
That this is simple. My story is, I am nothing special. There are so many people going through a story like mine or worse. Whenever I would leave the Mayo Clinic, I always wanted my own shoes. I never wanted somebody else's shoes. Everybody has something, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest misperception is that this whole thing is so simple that it's easy, and it's not. When you are having that internal debate that we talked about, that no, not today. No, I'm not going to do that. Oh, hell no, I can't do that. I'd rather just lay here because of all those things that don't line up, that aren't perfect. I have too much pain. I look terrible. I haven't even looked at the material lately. I'm whatever, I can't go out and pull the weeds because I want to pull them for an hour and I only have 10 minutes in me. The misconception stems from a lot of common myths about the challenging situations that we all are in. We can't ignore the pain. We can't ignore that something's going to go away. The notion, which you kind of had mentioned at one point, just get over it. It just doesn't work when we're really facing a hardship that oversimplifies that complex nature of human emotions in the healing process. But we need to recognize that. I think what really builds resilience, which I talk a lot about, is just taking that first ugly step. And that will help us with building community, strengthening relationships. It allows us to have support and support from some of the most unlikely people in your life. And it'll prevent that isolation that we talk about, that it's so easy to be isolated. It gives us increased empathy for others. It has given me a greater appreciation for life through difficult times. And it's given me a sense of purpose when we show up. Like, I look forward to showing up to my yoga class, even though I'm laying on that mat. I look forward to it. It gives me purpose. My mother, when I told her after, surgery 8, I'm like, actually, after surgery, like 4 or 5, I said, I can't keep doing this to you. You're in your 90s, Mom. This isn't right. It was so hard. Yet she would look at me and with tears in her eyes, she would say, "This is why God is keeping me alive. It is
Mm,
giving me purpose." And I think that sense of purpose for all of us, no matter what struggles we're going through, we have to have that to get through the hard times.
mm, I love that.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to do on my podcast is to challenge listeners with homework. And, I would challenge everybody listening to this to find those small ways to show up today, tomorrow, this week. Think about it. It may not be yoga, it may not be gardening, but whatever it is, think of those ways you can show up for yourself, for a friend. Where can people
hmm
find you?
My email at pathenneberry.com,
Yep.
or my website, pathenneberry.com. And
Buy the
that's
book. Everybody go
buy the
out,
book.
buy the book on
Uh,
Amazon or
I
Barnes
would
and Noble.
absolutely love
Yeah,
that.
review it,
If
share it. Yes.
if you're a speaker agent, I would love to talk to you.
Yes. Do all those things. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on All There Is and sharing your story.
I can't thank you enough. This has been a very special for me, for lots of reasons, because I really respect everything that you have been doing and the books that you have written. Think the world of you. So I'm honored to be on here.
Thanks for tuning in today. I really appreciate your time. Your time is so valuable. It's your most precious asset and commodity in this life that we live together. So thank you. And I want to leave you with an excerpt from Pat's memoir. And it's the epilogue, and it's called Dear Rebel. It starts with a quote: "If a bird believes it is an eagle long enough, it will eventually end up soaring like one." Dear Rebel, so many people will do their best to define you. They will look at you as a docile bird. They will think you are small and that you know your limits, but they don't. I give you full permission to rebel from the borders others will put around you. Only you can determine what a healthy recovery will look like for you. Healing comes in so many different forms, and I ask that you always allow yourself space to draw outside the lines, to climb a mountain in order to get a different perspective, and to question the defined measurables, knowing there are parts of you that are impossible to weigh externally. You will most likely face moments where your life is interrupted so greatly that you have no choice but to start over. Many will look at this with pity, but please make it a strength. Please show others starting over isn't a punishment, but an opportunity. You might need to sit out at times. You may need to evaluate your relationships. You may have to create a different schedule, try new hobbies, and cry more than you thought possible. Do it. All of this resembles courage, because you are choosing not to give up, but to simply shift. Shifting is the stuff all good comeback stories are made of. Shifting leads to soaring. The world can trick you into thinking you're alone during those deep-rooted moments of transition. Please note, you are not alone. As I've written this book, you have been on my mind. I don't know exactly what path life has given you. It's impossible to compare my pain and suffering to what you are experiencing. I do know, though, that I'm on your team as a loyal, wholehearted cheerleader. Maybe with less high kicks, but with a whole bunch of enthusiastic cheers. I've pictured your pain and struggles, and then I've seen your victories. I imagine you flying high like an eagle, triumphant in ways others may not notice, but that secretly shakes up the world. Many are too busy to notice, but I feel the rumblings of the earth moving as you take steps into the new. Whether you know it or not, we've been on this journey together. You are not alone. You will always be in my prayers and thoughts. Keep embracing your inner rebel, you badass you. Never forget how fucking strong you have been. I see you, and the life you lead is glorious. Love, Pat. So go to Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble, buy her book, My Soul Showed Up by Pat Henneberry. You can go to her website, pathenneberry.com. I'll make sure to have her name in the show description. Thanks for tuning in. You can go to kellybargabus.com to listen to all past episodes of All There Is. You can also find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So please share it, review it, like it, send it to a friend. I appreciate you. Until we meet again, take care.